The best of Money Matters. The Hot Seat.
Welcome to the Hot Seat, a debate segment where ideas clash and insights spark. I'm your host, Hongbin Jeong. Singapore's hawker centres are more than places to grab a quick meal. They're where culture, comfort, and community meet, and where small business owners hustle through long days to make a living. But what happens when the push for social good, such as free meals for the needy and app-driven discounts, collides with the razor-thin margins of these hawkers? In recent weeks, a controversy at Bukit Canberra Hawker Centre went viral when it emerged that hawkers could get demerit points or fines for not providing charity meals. The rule was later dropped, but many stallholders are still struggling with budget meals and app discounts that cut into their already narrow profits. This raises a pressing question for today's debate. Is it fair to treat social initiatives as a mandatory responsibility for hawkers? Just how much should we expect hawkers to give back to society? And at what cost to their own livelihoods? Before we hear from our guests and dive deeper into this debate, here's a disclaimer. The views and arguments presented by our interviewees do not necessarily reflect their personal beliefs or opinions. Instead, they're here to provide a fresh perspective on the topic at hand. Joining us today is KF Seetoh, Makansutra Founder, street food advocate and entrepreneur, who will argue that social initiatives should remain voluntary and not be forced upon hawkers. And George Wong, Assistant Professor of Sociology at SMU, who will argue that such responsibilities are important and should be part of a hawker's role in serving the community. Okay, hi both. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, same here.
All right, just to start off, why do you guys think the introduction of such requirements was seen as necessary in the first place? I mean, what were the operators hoping to achieve when they implemented this? Maybe, Seetoh, we can start off with you.
I have no idea. I think it's just passing up homework to the teacher so the operator can get A marks for saying that, hey, listen, my hawker center helps the poor. We feed the displaced and the poor and, hey, tap me on my head. I think it shouldn't. Hawkers themselves, as another sociologist once said, are struggling themselves. They too need help. So why is the onus on hawkers to help the displaced in society? Nobody really answered that.
What do you think, Professor Wong?
I kind of feel like this entire situation really, I think, boils down to the discussion stemming from how we see hawker culture as a sort of a public good. And I think since then, there have been a lot of traction around how different stakeholders thinking and really redefining how they could contribute to these notions of hawker culture. How do we sustain this as both, I think, not just something that we want, but collectively making sure that it works for the people who most, in some ways, affected by them. So what we're talking about would be people who use hawker, for example, for their daily lives, or for people who rely on them. And I think this is where it sort of gone, sort of a transition or kind of progress since then. And I think like what KF mentioned as well is really an interesting time, right, where we are asking some of these questions around, how do we define what hawker culture is for? Do we want to, think of it as a public good? And if it is a public good, how do we sustain them collectively as a community as well?
Right. I mean, the Pay It Forward initiative at Bukit Canberra HC required hawkers to provide 100 free meals over 3 years. Some critics called it forced charity, while the management eventually backtracked after a public outcry. So, Seetoh, if every hawker contributed just a little, wouldn't the burden be small while the community benefit is large?
Well, I couldn't find another word, so I coined the word forced charity. So, again, why is it the onus on them to help? I mean, the hawkers will help. I've seen with my own eyes hawkers helping the folks they know need free meals, seemingly ordinary looking folks. But the hawkers point out he or she is looking for a free meal and they openly give it to him or her. But two things here, free food. So you put it into a contract, that's onerous. And the other one, they have the $3 meal, which to me is all right. $3, the hawkers, kind of break even, just a little bit in. But that $3 meal, like I said, is open also to Bill Gates and Elon Musk. Why don't you just limit it to the people that can only afford $3 meal?
Right.
And again, why hawker food? Why not public transport free? Why
Right.
not a section at NTUC where all these things are given free for people? There are people at home, who collect all these things and give free groceries to their neighbors in their community. So there's this unconscious expectation that hawkers owe people a living,
Right.
which over the years, the stance has been softened. Some hawkers, yeah, I don't mind. But it is enshrined in a contract and in conscious minds that it's their expectation of hawkers to do this. Now, hawkers are just people who sell food. That's all. They are not missionaries, They do pay quite a bit. And it's not cheap to run a hawker stall these days. They make a living, and the real contribution that they give to society is the fact they sell it at way below world market rates. If you guys have passports and travel, you notice the prices of food in the region and around the world. People pay market rate. It's way above proportionately, what Singaporeans would pay for a plate of chicken rice. You pay $4 or $5. You go to Manila, that's $7 to $8, for
Right.
people earning one third, one quarter of what we earn down here. So that is the hawker's duty already. I'm doing my level best to provide affordable food. So why isn't that recognized? Why do they extend it to you must also give free food, you must also give $3 meals in a
Right.
contract?
Well, then, Professor Wong, given what Seetoh has said, and if charity becomes an obligation, doesn't it cross the line from social responsibility to forced compliance, especially for hawkers already struggling with thin margins?
Right. So I think broadly speaking, the obligation to serve this public good has been something I think that stakeholders have collectively come together to want to do something about it. I think where this, in this particular situation, at very least, is the legalization of this obligation to a contract that makes it, I think, very onerous for hawkers to, I think, define right how they would like to be voluntarily part of this program in itself. So what I do see in this very particular situation is just perhaps a breakdown in communication, a situation in which perhaps consent right was sort of up in the air between hawkers and the operators themselves. If only, for example, if there were some kind of town hall with hawkers, right, some kind of consent and the idea that they would want to be part of this, I think this would help to make the initiative itself a lot more palatable, a lot more buy-in, right, from the people who are actually most directly impacted and involved in, which are hawkers themselves.
Well, at several socially conscious enterprise hawker centers, hawkers must absorb the cost of 10% discounts given through operator apps. Now, some hawkers have lost up to $1,000 a month. Meanwhile, operators argue these discounts drive repeat business. So, Seetoh, don't loyalty schemes and discounts kind of attract customers and boost long-term business, even if margins are smaller? Can such benefits outweigh the upfront losses?
If you are down on the ground like me, you don't see the footfall. But for all that they say, they plow 50% back into the operations to do promotions and all that. You don't see, you don't hear. There, the footfall is terrible. I've been there, I've observed, I'm on the ground, I talk to the people. I know their numbers. It is very pathetic. And these operators, they're not transparent in what they do with this very public entity that everybody consumes. And Professor George was saying earlier, stakeholders, so they determine that these hawkers has this responsibility. I want to ask, who are the stakeholders? I mean, why do they, bilaterally or unilaterally come up with this and then lay it on the hawkers? Hawkers aren't just selling food; they are promoting this very, very lovely culture that we still have. So I really want to relook. And here we're only talking about maybe the free food, the blue box, or 15%, which has blown up. There are so many more items. I'm just too tired to write. I don't write so much these days. But there's another one. The hawkers at Canberra, they are not allowed to take leave unless permission is granted, like employee. An employee who pays rent, commissions, and profits to the landlord. So you tell me.
Right. Some great perspective that you've raised there. Well, then, Professor Wong, then isn't it unfair to force hawkers into such schemes when many didn't anticipate how widely the apps would be used? Isn't this exploitation disguised as promotion?
I think this is where what I mentioned earlier, the issue around communication comes into point. If these operators have communicated with the hawkers and there was buy-in, I believe that this entire initiative will be a lot more palatable. It will actually, in fact, allow hawkers to understand why such initiatives, I think, benefit them. But what we don't know at this moment is the process by which these buy-ins are made, right? So I think what we have seen so far is, like, KF shared, right, that these are things that are made into contract. But what we don't know is whether there were any town halls, whether there were any negotiations, discussions to show how these things actually work for hawkers themselves, right? So I think
That one I know.
Yeah. So what we do see, in fact, would be, on the one hand, some hawkers do benefit from it. On the other hand, there will be hawkers who may not necessarily benefit from a scheme that may not just apply to across the board. And I think it also shows the diversity of hawkers that we are dealing with here, right? There are some food which a lot more so economically possible, right, to reap the benefits of such a award, while there are others which are, may not be the case as well. So it's one of the challenges, I suppose, business operators like these hawker operators face is finding an initiative that really works for everyone, right? And it takes time to refine that process. But I think ultimately is what KF also has hinted at would be consent and communication is central, right, to all of this.
Well, NEA says hawkers are not expected to make losses since rentals and grants are structured to offset obligations. So, Seetoh, with the government grants and subsidies available, are they really carrying the weight of government policy on their shoulders, though?
I don't know what grants that's given. I think that grants are given to the operators, not the hawkers. The hawkers are just there to sign, and they want to quickly sell that first plate of something as soon as possible. So you talk about town hall. I can tell you this. Yes, the hawkers tell me, yo, town hall 的, yo, town hall 的. And you know what the town hall is? They sit there, they give their 32 or 36 page contract, and they say, this is approved by the government. It's a take it or leave it situation. The hawkering is the lowest form of micro entrepreneurism in Singapore. And then when the operator says this is approved by the government, what do you want them to do? They can only trust the government. So if you say blindly, they trust this government. Some say blindly, but look at the repercussions. Hawkers aren't people who pour through that 32 page and argue on this point. Where is the space to argue when they say this is approved by NEA?
Well, Lanha Jabal revealed that Bukit Canberra Hawker Centre contracts included clauses allowing demerit points and fines for hawkers who failed to join a charity meal scheme. Although operator Canopy Hawkers Group said the rules were not enforced and would be reviewed, their inclusion in 2022 contracts has sparked public backlash. So, Professor Wong, given such clauses, doesn't this show why charities should remain voluntary with hawkers contributing only when they can genuinely afford to? I mean, why penalize them?
Right. So again, one of the biggest problem with these things is trying to put something that's voluntary, something that's meant to be, I think, a social initiative into a contractual obligation. And what we get is, a lot of sort of situations where it feels very coerced. It feels like there's a potential, to, or at least perceived to be coerced. Where it could have been, done better could be, right, communicating, I think, with organizations or stakeholders who have the experience of initiating such social initiatives and working with them to really find a way where it does not have to be a legal obligation, right? So how do we do it? How do we work it out to make sure that it not just is viable for, the people who are enjoying these initiatives, but also for the other stakeholders like the hawkers themselves, right, who may have certain concerns that they want to raise that, they want to sort of collectively talk about. I think just responding to KF's, point about, how some of these town halls were made, I think this is precisely why I think the importance of, collective bargaining, the idea of having a kind of representation do matter. And I'm just mindful that we know of such, organizations, like, for example, the Federation of Merchants Association Singapore, typically would represent, right, groups of hawkers to be in such situations as well. So maybe what's required here is some sort of, collective representation that could help individual hawkers navigate through some of these things that they may not have the bandwidth to deal with, right? So I'm sort of empathetic with what KF has mentioned as well. Hawkers' role really is to provide a good, warm meal at affordable cost, but there is a lot of more complex bureaucracy around some of these things that hawkers may not be prepared to handle alone. And this is where, these organizations, a lot of associations come in to really help them, go through that.
Right. Just to wrap up our conversation here, we've got great perspectives on both ends. In light of the backlash, then, should the SCHC model be reformed or kept? How can hawkers balance social good with business survival? Is there a better way forward? Maybe, Seetoh, we can start off with you.
I think, we can nitpick on all this, why the hawker did this, why they did that. But, I've been in the hawkers committee since the turn of this century, where I've been listening to some really, really good sound ideas that we could implement back in 2000, early 2000 or 2010, and don't see it being implemented today. What the NEA really has to do, and they have to step up, is to rethink this whole process and come up with a really strict, tight, firm guidelines for all SCHC players to follow. Don't some run away and ask for free food. Some ask for 15%, some ask for this and some ask for that. It will destroy this new generation of new hawkers who are so frightened right now to enter the trade. NEA's contract is only 6 pages, very straightforward. It's tight enough. They have been doing it for decades. They don't have much serious problems. And there's a lot of leeway for the hawkers to play and thrive in that 6 pages. These ones are 32 pages. It is a solitary cell of a contract for them. They can't move much. So back to NEA, they really, really have to step up, rethink, and come up with this very clear guidelines. And on the one hand, it's NEA, environment. They're not the experts in governing food culture, but they're in charge. That's the unfortunate part. You really need a new agency to do this, like EMAS, who handles HDB's services.
Well, Professor Wong, what are your thoughts?
Well, I do share some of KF's concerns. Where I beg to differ really is, instead of thinking about this entire situation as either reform or to leave it as status quo, what we need is really a refinement of the process in itself. And what I mean by refinement is to recognize the fact that we should not throw the baby out with the bathwater. What we have in this situation is a model that clearly has started, right? And there's a lot of teething issues, clearly. And where we are at this moment is the need for, I think, a lot more communication, consent, and in fact, collaboration between not just hawkers and, operators, but also really the other kind of stakeholders, including, the public agencies. And also, I think an important stakeholder we haven't talked about in this conversation really is the consumers themselves. I think consumers, the moment they are willing to pay a little bit more, the moment they're willing to sort of put their money where their mouth is where we can actually think about, supporting this hawker culture as a social compact that allows different people to play different roles. So again, back to the idea of obligation, not to make it a legal obligation, but one that's very social, that everyone knows they have a part to play in this. And that's, I think, where we could elevate, right, hawker culture, where people they kind of know what's their role in it and why they need to give in a little in order to benefit and reap, right, the greater rewards. And of course, ultimately, I think this entire situation itself, hawker is still a business, right? This is business at various levels. The hawkers themselves, the operators themselves. There needs to be, I think, some kind of margin for the businesses to make it viable. Because the last thing we want would be operators themselves saying this is not viable and then no one comes to the market. What we want is a situation where a lot more operators are able to say, let me come in, let me experiment. There may be some things that good practices. There are things that, we didn't do well previously. Let's refine from there. Let's go forward, find a way forward. And when we have a lot more, I think, operators coming into the space, what we get is a lot more innovation. We get a lot more different ways of doing things. And what hawkers then have a choice would be which operators, which, place they want to open up, knowing that, there is some kind of choice to be made. And once we have that, I think we have a more refined industry, something that can draw some best practices, not just from within the private sector, but also from, some of the NEA-run hawker centers as well.
All right, some great perspectives from both of you. Thank you so much both for joining me today.
Thank you so much, then.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've been speaking to KF Seetoh, Makansutra Founder, street food advocate and entrepreneur, and George Wong, Assistant Professor of Sociology at SMU. Tune in again next week for another Hot Seat. I've been your host, Hongbin Jeong.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.